Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today's is a good one. We're going to talk about the difference between a Craw style Texas rig and a Beaver style Texas rig. I get this question all the time from viewers where they want to know what's the best. Should I be throwing a Craw on my Texas rig or should I be throwing a Beaver style bait on my Texas rig? And I'm here to tell you that there is a time and place for both. So I want to walk you through the differences of the two baits, give you examples as to where and when I like to use each, because I do think that paying attention to your Texas rig bait, whether it's a Craw or a Beaver style bait, can make a big difference in your success on the water. Oftentimes, I think people just reach for their favorite bait all of the time and say, this is going to be it. And in reality, I think it can cost them some bites. Now, I think there's times and places where they're very much indifferent and you can have similar success on either bait, but there are definitely times where I like one over the other. So that's what we're going to get into. Before I do, I want to remind you guys that if you want a little bit of help on your local lakes, check out the lake breakdowns that I do at fishthemoment.com. We provide 40 waypoints based on the season for different areas and techniques on that lake. So check those out. The link is in my video description. Also, if you want to support the channel, please use my Tackle Warehouse affiliate link to make your tackle purchases. Great way to support the channel. Every dollar from that comes right back to creating content to hopefully help people catch more fish. All right, so let's talk about the difference here. I've got two of my favorite Texas rig baits. This is the Berkley Power Bait Chigger Craw in the new Labatt blue color, one of my absolute favorite looking baits and colors. And then this one here is the Berkley Power Bait Maxcent Creature Hog, which is one of my favorite flipping baits as well. This is the South African Special, one of my favorite bait colors. So the main differences, let's talk about the differences between these baits, and then we'll get into how I like to fish them. The main difference right off the bat that I think most of you recognize is with the Craw baits, you have big flapper legs. And with the Beaver style baits, you've just got straight legs that really don't do much in terms of action. So what that does is it gives the baits a different action. So we're going to talk about these baits as if they're rigged exactly the same. Let's say a 1/4 ounce pegged Texas weight. If you're throwing a Beaver style bait like this Creature Hog, this bait, because of the shape of it, is going to glide more on the fall. The action is the gliding action, the irregular fall of the bait. With a cross style bait, if you're using a 1/4 ounce weight or whatever the weight is, what happens is the flapper legs create drag in the water and your bait falls vertical. But while it's falling, the flappers are making motion. So they're creating vibration in the water. But you don't get much movement out of the bait itself. It falls vertical versus the spiraling irregular motion of the Beaver style bait. That's the first big difference. The second has to do with the action in itself, like I said. So we just talked about falling motion. The action is built into this bait with the flapper legs versus very little motion built into this bait. So if you're talking about creating vibration and trying to attract fish from the bait itself, the actual vibration that the bait is creating, the cross style ones are going to give you much more vibration. They're going to create much more water movement. So that's a big difference in itself. The next one has to do more with what is it imitating? Well, I think most people would say that the Craw does a better job at imitating bottom prey. So crayfish, maybe more of your gobies, fish that are really relating tight to the bottom, and your crayfish. I mean, that is what this bait is shaped to look like. The Beaver style baits have much more of a bait fish profile. So you're talking about your shad, your small bluegills, and therefore, in my opinion, and when you consider the movement of it on the fall, these imitate your bait fish more. So if you're thinking about imitating the prey that the fish you're after are feeding on, if it's more crayfish, you might want to think about the Craw. If it's more bait fish, you might want to think about the Beaver style baits. The last big difference has to do with fall rate. Because the Craw flappers create drag in the water, this bait will fall much slower than a Beaver style bait with the same size Texas rigged weight. So if you're looking for a faster fall with the weight you're using, you might want to think about a beaver bait. If you're looking for a slower fall, you might want to think about a craw that has flappers. So those are four pretty big differences for baits that kind of look the same. But if you're talking about the major differences between the two, those four things are pretty much the big differences. So let's take those differences and apply them now to where I like to use these baits. The first is going to come down to water clarity. So if I'm fishing clear water, I generally prefer to go with a beaver style bait because I like that more irregular fall that looks much more natural to me than a craw style bait that's flapping on the fall. Now, with clear water, because of that, what a couple of things to point out. One, that irregular fall has a better tendency at triggering reaction strikes. And if the fish can see your bait better, then they'll bite more of them on the fall. And the second is the clearer the water you have, the generally the more the bass will spread out from the bottom. So you get more bites on the fall because the fish are higher off the bottom. Now, if I'm fishing darker water, I like to go with a cross style bait because one, the fish can't see it as well, so they need to feel it to locate it. So those craw flappers are creating vibration that they're picking up with their lateral line. And two, because of that, I like a slower fall in muddy water because it gives them more time to find the bait as it's falling. And in dirty water, generally the fish are going to be tighter to the bottom, and therefore a craw bait being dragged along the bottom with every little movement, you get a little bit more flap, which is going to generate that motion and allow the fish to find it. So, as a rule of thumb, generally in clear water, I like to go more with a beaver, dirty water, more of a craw. Doesn't have to be that way, but it is an important factor to consider. Next up has to do with the cover that I'm fishing. If I'm fishing sparse cover, I like to go more with a beaver style bait because that sparser cover allows my bait to go in and out and move around more. And therefore, again, I create more reactionary strikes. If you're fishing really thick cover, say I'm flipping, into bushes or I'm flipping into really thick grass, a lot of times you don't have the ability to allow your bait to glide when it gets under. In some cases, say you're flipping hyacinth, you've got a whole big open area underneath that floating hyacinth. But say you're flipping, thick cattail reeds, a craw can be a better bait in that option because a lot of times though you don't have that gliding motion within the cattail reeds because you just have stalk, stalk, stalk. So, with having said that, when you're in really thick cover, a lot of times that gliding motion, even though it can create a reactionary strike, you get a lot of missed strikes because what happens is as it is falling, say if this were to glide amongst the cattail, it can actually wrap around the cattail and the fish will go and try to strike it, but it's behind the cattail, so they miss it because of that irregular fall. So when I'm fishing really heavy cover, I do like to go with a craw because of that more vertical fall. I feel like my hookup percentage is much better because the fish tend to get it because it's an easier target for them on the fall. So that's something to keep in mind as well. I will say sometimes if you're flipping heavy cover, flapper legs can be a little bit of a nuisance though because they can get wrapped around some of the cover. So it is one of those things just to consider again. The next has to do with what are you targeting? What type of bait fish are the fish feeding on that you're after? So if you're fishing, say, during the shad spawn, I like to go much more with a beaver style bait when I'm flipping because a lot of those fish are so keyed into shad style movements, which this bait does a much better job at mimicking. If I'm fishing, say, when the water temp is in the low 60s and a lot of your crayfish are starting to pull out and the fish are starting to pull up for the spawn, a cross style bait can be a much better one to go with. So, again, it comes down to what bait fish or what is the prey of the fish that you're trying to catch? What is the main thing that they're eating at that time of year? And that can fluctuate and change throughout the course of the year. So, again, if you're looking at mimicking fish that eat a lot of bluegills, this is a much better bait to go with, in my opinion, than a cross style bait. The last really comes down to the time of the year. And again, you're going to have some circumstances where you've got fish that are keying in much more on crayfish or bait fish. And if I'm really trying to mimic that, time of year can come into play. The last thing I'm going to point out is the depth of the water that you're flipping. So if you're flipping much deeper water and you've got relative good water clarity, you're going to get much more motion out of your beaver style bait than you will a flapper. So if you're flipping 6 feet of water, that longer distance and fall will really give you much more motion and allow the beaver to obtain more motion and more movement than your slow falling cross style bait, which is going to be flapping. So you want to consider water depth as well. If I'm flipping only 2 feet of water, I may not want my bait to fall right to the bottom. I may want my fish to have just that little bit of extra time that a cross style bait gives you because it's only falling 2 feet, but maybe it adds a half a second or even potentially up to a second based on the size of the weight that you're using. But it is something to keep in mind. So there's a lot of variables here. The type of forage you're trying to mimic, the water depth you're fishing, the water clarity, the thickness of the cover you're fishing, it all comes into play. Now, with both of these baits, they absolutely have a time and place. There's a lot of times I don't think that they're interchangeable, and there's times when I do think they're interchangeable. But these are the criteria that I'm always looking at and evaluating when I head out on the water and I know I'm going to be using one of these on a Texas rig. I don't think it matters in terms of your setup. I think you're looking at using the same rod and reel, same line, same weight and hook with both of these baits. It just comes down to more the conditions, the time of year, the places that you're fishing. That's really what comes into play. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully it answers some of the questions that I've been getting out there. Texas rigged flipping is one of my absolute favorite things to do. It's one of the best fish catching techniques that we have. Catches lots of numbers, catches big ones as well. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, we'll have a new tip for you tomorrow.